bring in now Jim Walsh. He's an international security expert. Good to see you, Jim.
Good to see you, Fred.
All right, so what can Carter say to Israel to perhaps win more support for this deal?
Well, I think he'll meet with two very different groups in Israel. He'll meet with the politicians, President Netanyahu and other cabinet ministers, and they're just going to chew his ear off, and there's nothing he can say that's going to make them happy. But he'll also meet with intel and military people in Israel, and they have a very different view of this agreement. In fact, if you look at current Israeli military assessments as they project out over 10 years, and factor in an agreement, they see themselves in a better position in terms of Israeli national security going forward. They like the idea that, we may double the number of inspectors and that Iran is going to be under lock and key for that period of time. So they are much more supportive of it. But I don't think there's any convincing Benjamin Netanyahu. I think he's pretty firm in his views.
And so you heard Kerry say without the deal, there would be no inspections, there would be no sanctions, and so Iran would be able to continue doing whatever it is that it's doing unchecked. Is that really the only point that needs to be made to remind countries in that region, especially during Ash Carter's Middle Eastern tour?
Yeah, I think that's fundamental. I mean, I would go, see, the Saudis don't like this deal because they don't like Iran. It's not about nuclear. It's because they're wrapped in this big rivalry that's embroiling the region, and they like sanctions just because it keeps Iran down. But they don't really care about the nuclear. I think for all the countries in the Middle East, it is in their national security interest to block Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I mean, it's good for us and it's good for them. And this deal does that. And, I've looked at a bunch of different deals over time, and this is not our first rodeo. This is not our first non-proliferation agreement. We had one with Muammar Gaddafi, who hated Israel and funded terrorism. We had it with the Soviets, and they had gulags. I think this 159 pages is arguably the toughest, most intrusive agreement of its kind.
And then how does the U.S. argue against the fact that with sanctions lifted, Iran will regain some wealth and could potentially become a lot more influential in the region?
I mean, it could. They're sort of bogged down in Syria right now, and they're bogged down in Iraq fighting ISIS, which is what we want them to do. But, I mean, they're going to get some sanctions relief. But I don't understand the logic of this argument. If you don't like Iran with terrorism, why would you like Iran with terrorism and nuclear weapons? The people who say let's not give them $1 because it might end up supporting Hezbollah, what they're saying is no nuclear agreement, right? We shouldn't have any nuclear agreement because there's no agreement conceivable where they do what we want them to do on nuclear. They do what we tell them, and then they get nothing in return. There's no planet on which that agreement is possible. So if you're saying no, what you're doing is saying unconstrained nuclear program in Iran. Iran does the terrorism and it has nuclear weapons. I think that's a terrible outcome.
And I know you would rather talk about the science behind this, but of course there's also the politics. And if Congress has 60 days to review this, and the president has said he would veto anything that would stand in the way of this deal going forward, what could potentially be offered? What would be an idea potentially offered by Congress for those members who don't necessarily like the way it's written as such?
Well, I think there'll be, negotiations and consultations. I'd love to see Congress take an active role in this. It's Congress that helped get us to this point. They should take credit for that, and they should have an active role going forward. A colleague of mine has suggested setting up sort of a commission in which members of Congress could participate to help ensure that this deal is being implemented. And they could go to the IAEA, they could go to Iran. A second thing they could do, make sure the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has the resources it needs, because this is going to be a big job. But every dollar they spend is a win for us.
All right, Jim Walsh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And